great to be here. And let me just give you kind of a quick overview then of what we did and what worked well for us.
Right.
So I think with Gousto, we were quite fortunate in that we're an online food business. We already had a pretty high growth rate. We're a pretty early stage company, but at the same time, the online food market exploded last year. So on top of our baseline growth rate, we had a market that went from around 7% penetration, so that was around the proportion that online food had in January 2020, to about 13% penetration by summer 2020. So just a huge growth rate for that market on top of the growth we already had as an organization. So that for us, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it added a challenge on capacity. How do we feed the nation? How do we ship enough orders across the country to meet that level of demand? And how do we do that in a situation where a lot of the activity that you typically do to meet this growth has quite long lead times? You know, we can pull forward the dates of launching a new factory, but we still have to get a factory, source the location, fit it out, everything else. So that was a challenge for us. I think as a data team, we tried to think about where we could best help and how we could try and meet that challenge. And I'd say there were a few things that worked quite well for us. And really trying to draw on all of the capabilities we had across the different parts of the data team. So I think the first thing, it's probably the most straightforward, but we tried to make use of data analytics to inform decisions that could help us operate in a more efficient way and unlock more capacity. So an example of that, as a company, we had an operational decision to adopt what we called pre-collation. So this was taking ingredients that otherwise would be either dropped into your box directly, so a piece of ginger or a piece of garlic, or maybe were put in like a spice bag for a few of them, and instead pre-collating those ingredients in a bag for an individual recipe. So for a given recipe, a large number of the ingredients would come in this specific bag, and customers would have seen that at some point last year if they were using the service before. Now that was an operational idea. There were a lot of operational considerations to validate it and to make it work, but also data tried to lean into that to validate that decision and the impact it would have on throughput and the impact it would have operationally as well. So that was an example where we just tried to provide quick analysis to help support operational decisions. And there were many more. I think the other things though were sort of related to other capabilities in our team. So we also used data science to try and unlock more capacity. And we did that in a couple of ways. Sometimes we would launch new data products. So one example of that, we launched a product that would configure our lines asymmetrically, which we'd modeled as a way to unlock more capacity. That was a new product for us. We launched that, it did unlock more capacity in our factories. We also used algorithms elsewhere, not directly in our operation. So we have an algorithm that helps design our menu, and that optimizes for more variety. We want more variety on menus week by week and within a given week to meet what customers look to see. But it can also optimize to increase efficiency in the operation. So we tried to balance the variety of those recipes with a demand to minimize the number of SKUs that we were using in a given week, which helped unlock more throughput in the factories as well. Then the last thing I'd say is more foundational. So we also tried to bring data engineering to bear on this problem. We made sure that we would prioritize ingestion and transformation of data sources that would help us with all of the activities I mentioned. So as an example, we would ingest data from a production line to get a more granular read of throughput, which helped us better understand how we could unlock more throughput in the future and what would help and what wouldn't help. So those were kind of a set of things that worked. And I think it was the mix of those that really helped. So things we did that helped. I think there's an element of make use of what you have. So rather than trying to create entirely new algorithms to address this challenge, although that is important, we would often look at our existing suite of algorithms and think about where they could be extended or used in different ways. So the menu algorithm was an example of that. We already had an algorithm that could optimize for various attributes on our menu. We then thought about how we could tune and tweak that to support our capacity challenge. So that was one aspect of it. And I think another thing that helped a lot was staying very close to other professionals in tech and to other stakeholders in the business. So we try to embed our data scientists and our data analysts very closely with a cross-functional group of people in the organization. That's important in general, but on these occasions, it's ever more important because you don't have the luxury of doing some initial development, finding that you've missed some unknown, having to loop back and so on. You have to be sort of very closely coupled with other teams in your org. Probably the biggest macro challenge for us was trying to select where we allocate our resource and how we build these products, which sounds quite abstract, but if I give you a bit more detail on that, we have a range of different opportunities where we can invest data science or data analytics time if we're trying to address that capacity situation. Knowing where to place those bets was quite difficult because there were a raft of opportunities that we could have considered. If I talk about one, which was that third-party factory, when we get into that as well, launching a new factory, whether it's third-party or not, shifts you, if you're a company that only has one factory, from a single site operation to a multi-site operation. So it's actually quite a complex piece of work with all sorts of new products and tech that needed to do things like forecast at a site-specific level or handle order routing, determine which site you need to route certain orders to. So it actually imposed quite a lot of complexity. Deciding how much complexity to take on early was quite a big challenge. And that was an example where we took a conscious trade-off to maximize speed at the cost of sophistication. So we had a lot of products we developed then where we just took a conscious choice to build a V1 that will get us a level of stability with that multi-site operation, knowing that it will not be gold-plated or the final level of what optimization we want to drive. So those were quite tricky decisions, because if you get those wrong, then you can end up with your data team misaligned with the rest of the organization, and maybe with products that can't even take you to that first stage because you're still in more of an R&D mode. Equally, if you do the other side of it and go too far on simplicity, things fall down. So being able to get that balance right was a challenge. I'm going to say a couple of things. One is be willing to reorient your focus quite dramatically. As a data team, often you're going to be working at relatively slow cycles compared to other parts of the organization, where you're doing a lot of research and development and trying to build new products that peer into the future. So that's often the mode that data teams operate on. If that's the case for you and you're going through this situation, I think you need to have a very rapid mindset shift, which you need to try and cascade through your team, that the world has changed and we need to operate quite differently for a period of time. So that's kind of part one. And you do need to try and embed that culture in your team, because you'll want your team to have a similar mentality and be spotting opportunities in the same way and thinking about developing data products in a very applied way for a period of time, which may not always be what everyone wants to do. Right? It kind of changes the dynamic of the team for a period of time, which can be exciting and can have downsides. That's one thing I'd say. I'd say be creative on use cases, really push yourself and your team to think about where you can help. Often it will be entirely new ideas that the organization just hadn't thought of before, but often it will be repurposing existing data products in new ways, like we did with our menu algorithms. And I think there's always something there that you can do as a data team if you push yourself hard enough to think about that. That's one thing that I would take away from it. I think be willing to make conscious speed and sophistication trade-offs if you need to. Do it consciously and openly. So if you do need to build something that is very prototypical and V1, that may be the right trade-off, but you should surface that and be aware that you will have to pay down some of that technical debt later, and that it is the right trade-off for you at that time. That's one thing I'd say. The risk with all of this, when you shift into more of a short-term mindset, is that you perhaps then lose sight of what will be coming down the track 6 months, 12 months, 24 months away, and so on. I don't think we lost sight of these things on our side. We did still have a set of priorities that we would try and push. We were building what we called our call it a target operating model, but it's a suite of tech and data products to enable multi-site at scale that we're building out now as an organization. But one thing I would say is, if I could turn the clock back, I probably would have invested even more sooner in some of those future capabilities. So if we had invested even more in, say, the future of forecasting, we'd be even further ahead now, which would have been more investment. It wouldn't be a reallocation of resources, but may have been the right call at that point with that growth level. Yeah. So that's one thing I took away from it, which I think is a risk if you are very short-term oriented for a period of time compared to your normal cycle.